So what should we talk about today?
Film.
Yeah, I think we should probably talk about filmmaking, right?
I think last week you said we were going to get into more about cameras, right? And the camera loan program, because I know you said they're going to ease into it.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, that'll be the first thing we talk about today. So here's the deal. They are going to loan cameras out to students. They're going to be something like a Canon Rebel, like this guy right here. They're not going to be the big fancy cinema cameras that we have, or the more modified 5Ds. Just for the sake, we don't have enough to get them out to everybody, so we've got enough of these. So the protocol to doing it, I'm hoping to have by the end of today or tomorrow. So Amber, who's in charge of the equipment room, is working that out. She's creating a whole little workflow of what the procedure is going to be to doing it. I will tell you that you'll have to go on campus to do it. And that's all I know at the moment, but we should be able to start probably getting access to that probably maybe by the end of the week. I'll find out. I'll know more after class today when I have time to talk to her. And then as soon as I get all that information, I will post it to the announcement section here in class for you guys. And that'll get the ball rolling. Second thing I want to talk about is Adobe. Has anybody tried to log into Adobe with success? Today, tomorrow, try and log in and try and download and see if you've got access to the school, because my other class, which is photo class, some students who now have access. So I guess the licenses process is going through, and so I don't know how it works, how quick it takes someone to get access, but it should. The ball is rolling. So let's everybody give it a shot to try to get online and see if you can download it. Because what's going to happen is once you get access to Creative Cloud, you should have some option there to download the installer, which is basically this little Adobe Creative Cloud app that will run on your computer. And from that app is where you'll install everything that you want. And that's up to you what you want to do, because you should have full access to everything in theory. But what we really need for the class is definitely Adobe Premiere. I think when you install Adobe Premiere, you get Media Encoder also. And then you probably want to install Adobe Bridge. And maybe if you want to play around, install Adobe Photoshop. But there, again, are a whole bunch of apps there. And if you got access to them and you want to play around, go for it, right? Might as well if you're getting it for free. And if anybody has any issues where like, it's not working, give me a couple of days and try it again. And then let me know, let's say by next class, I'll hit everybody up. And if you're still having problems, then we'll start creating a list of who has problems and needs to be troubleshooting. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So we talked about that. How about last class? Anybody got any questions about that? It seemed pretty self-explanatory, right? The idea of framing and some of the basic design elements that I talked about.
Can you use lens filters on the cameras that they might loan us, like the Canon Rebels?
You can, but you'd have to, if you have access to them, and they have to be the right size. So for example, this one is 67 millimeter filters. So you might be able to get, if you've got access to those filters, put them on. I don't know if I don't think they have ND filters for these cameras. So that's gonna be out of luck getting them provided by the school. But you might be able to pick some up somewhere if you want. It's, again, I'm not holding everybody against, you're using the shutter to control exposure and shooting outdoors, because remember we had that conversation that ideally you want to be at 180-degree shutter, which translates to 24p to, everybody remember, what's the magic fraction?
That's 50, right?
Yes, somebody got it.
I'm terrible with numbers, so it takes me like.
Oh my God, I'm safe, man. I'm not going to get fired.
If we were to buy a camera ourselves, what do you suggest?
That's a difficult question to answer very quickly. Let me see where we're at today. We may have time to talk about it today, but I know I'm planning on having a longer conversation about it. Maybe we'll have that conversation today.
Okay.
So what's the primary thing that's going to decide what you buy? Anybody know?
How much money you're willing to spend.
Exactly. So it's all about money, unfortunately. So whether I buy this guy, which is more of an entry-level camera, or I buy a red camera, or I buy a black magic camera, all these things are going to be the choice. What's really going to help me decide my choice is how much I can afford. And on top of that, it's going to be also not just the camera, but I also got to consider everything else I need to do it. So for example, if I buy the body, I got to buy a lens. So what lenses do I want to get? Okay, well, what can I afford? So if I'm starting out, I probably can't afford cinema lenses, so I'm probably going to have to buy still glass lenses, which is, it's okay. We've all shot with still and got the job done. But there's some other things I may want to think about getting too. So what would that be? Well, maybe I want some type of tripod, right, to use, because if I'm going to shoot everything handheld, and maybe that's the style. Maybe I'm shooting my first little project. I'm like, I'm just going to do it all handheld. Okay, that's fine. Then maybe I want to consider buying a cage for this, something that can help me handle the camera and not just hold it like this. So normally what I try to do is figure out what's the total amount of money that I have to spend, whether that's $200 or $2,000 or $20,000. It's irrelevant. And then from there, figure out what's the main components that I'm going to absolutely need to get going at first. So the clear choice is going to be having a camera body and then also a lens, right? Without those, I can't do squat. So I'm definitely going to take that into consideration. And then probably if I don't have a lot of money, I'm probably going to get something like this. And if I'm going to pick a camera body, an inexpensive camera body, I probably would lean towards a Sony Alpha camera instead of a Canon Rebel. There's nothing wrong with Canon Rebels. They're good cameras, but Sony Alphas are going to be a little bit more geared towards filmmaking and video production than still cameras. So what about them that's going to be better than, say, this Rebel? The first thing is going to be the Rebel has it's an DSLR, which means it has a mirror in it, right? And so when I take a picture, the mirror is down and I can see through the eyepiece. And as soon as I take a picture, it flips up and lets the light go through and hit the sensor, right? Everybody's heard that. Like if I turn this on and take a picture, you hear the noise, the shutter going. That's great for still photography, but it's got a bad thing about it for video. And the bad part about it is that in order for me to see video on the screen back here, I have to turn on the video mode, which I do. And if you look here, oh, look, hey, I could see the video, right? But the downside is the mirror had to flip up to let the light through to get to the sensor. So if I hold my eye into the eyepiece is disabled because it's blocked by the mirror. So that means I can't use the eyepiece in DSLRs whenever I want to shoot video. And you're like, okay, that's no big deal, right? But what if I'm shooting outdoors and I can't see very well here? Well, I'm going to squint. What if I would need to shoot low like this and my monitor doesn't tilt up or flip up? They start becoming problems. So these cameras aren't the best for video, in my opinion. So what would be the best? Well, I'd say Sony, because Sony has made the decision to make all their cameras mirrorless cameras. There's no mirror in them. In fact, the eyepiece is a LCD, a high resolution LCD. So that means that when I put it into video mode, I can look at the screen in the back, or I can hold it up to my eye and shoot through the eyepiece. Why do you guys think it would be an advantage to shooting through the eyepiece?
You have more of a sense. Actually, no, I don't know.
Well, you're seeing something that's almost totally unfiltered, right? You're not seeing what the camera is giving you as the image. You're seeing what's in front of you. I don't know.
No. Okay. I think that would be the opposite if I was looking through a DSLR. But on a mirrorless, it's not a clear optic. It's actually another little LCD screen I'm looking at. So it's not that complicated. The real reason, the advantage over it is two. The first is going to be, I could shoot outdoors in broad daylight and then stick my eye in the eyepiece and see everything because the sun's not glaring off the back viewfinder. I can also get it closer to my eye and focus in here with my eye. Gives me a bigger field of view. Right here, I'm just looking at this little screen in front of me, right? But if I take it to my eye, what happens to that screen in there? It fills my eye, right? I could see more. I could see focus maybe a little bit better. The sun is blocked from me getting in, from leaking in there for me and seeing. So it works a lot better for shooting outdoors. So that's a big advantage in my opinion. And yeah, like this Rebel's nice. It's got a flip out here and I can do this and I can still shoot. Some people prefer to shoot with a monitor outside and put their eye in the eyepiece. For me, I disagree with that. I've always been an eyepiece person. And that's maybe because I've grown up, shot with cameras all the time that only had eyepieces. But for me, it's a better controlled experience. So Sony cameras or any camera that's a mirrorless camera is going to give you that advantage over a regular Rebel camera like this. Everybody kind of see how that can help you out. The second thing too is these cameras, like notoriously older Canon cameras, and again, the newer ones coming out, everybody's getting on the same bandwagon. Canon is now coming out with a line of mirrorless cameras. In fact, mirrorless is the future. DSLRs, dangerous species. They're going to be gone in 5 to 10 years. No one's going to use them anymore. There's no reason to. The eyepieces are such high resolution. Also, the eyepieces, I'm seeing exposure. I'm seeing zebra patterns. I can see everything the way it's actually going to be recorded and not just looking through an eyepiece. So there's an advantage there. But the other thing too is these guys are notorious for only being able to keep the shutter open for a certain amount of time. So early Canon cameras, Mark IV, Mark IV, Mark III, you could only keep the camera recording video for maybe 10 minutes and then it would stop. And so there was a combination of reasons for that. One of the reasons was that the chips inside, which are amazing image processing chips, but they weren't really designed to handle video properly. So they would overheat. And so the camera had to close and shut down. Specifically, if you're shooting in a high temperature area, like if you're out shooting in the desert, they could easily overheat. The second thing is there was this crazy trade tariff thing going on between Japan and the United States, and basically in order to get it through the tariff, they had to not make it a video camera and make it a still camera, which meant that they couldn't let the camera record past 10 minutes. It was ridiculous. And then it finally got resolved and removed, but the older cameras still have that hierarchy. So even this one won't indefinitely record. So Sony cameras, the Alpha series, get past that. Panasonic cameras have gotten past that. And now, of course, finally, the newer Canon cameras have gotten past that limitation. So those are the other things to think about, maybe leaning towards a mirrorless camera. So is there any negative, do you think, about having a mirrorless camera over a DSLR? I don't think there's many, if any. The thing about Sony cameras and the thing about Panasonic is that they are more video formatted. They're more geared towards video production, film production than they are still. So if that's what you want to do, and I'm assuming you are since you're hanging out with me in this class, that's the camera you probably want. If you're more like, I really want a great still camera that can do some video, well, then maybe the Canon Rebel or a 5D, Mark IV or used Mark III might be the choice for you, because their cameras are primarily still cameras that take gorgeous still images and can also make decent, video. Then it doesn't mean that Sony cameras aren't capable of taking still. They can, obviously. They make gorgeous images. So for me, when I look at everything on a scale and kind of balance the two, it always leans towards Sony for me. They seem to have all the things set up in their cameras that are more geared towards cinematography as their priority over still photography, yet it's still in a film, a still camera form function. But that's the better choice for me. That makes sense, everybody? About questions. Fire away. Let's hear them.
What year did the alpha models stop selling or stop making them with the mirrors?
I think they always were mirrorless.
Oh, okay,
Sony,
okay.
Sony's alphas are the newcomer on the new kid on the block. You know, Sony's been making cameras. Sony's been making video cameras and cinema cameras for decades. All throughout my career, I'm 90% of the time shot with Sony cameras. So they've been around the block, but they didn't really jump too far into the still world until maybe about 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. And so I think when they first made that crossover to stills, they already were going to say, well, we're doing mirrorless cameras. There's no need. For them, they look in the future and said there's no reason for DSLR at this point. And so they kind of adopted that up front, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because while you were describing it, I wanted to see what did they have on the internet, and most of the places online have these cameras at $1,000, but I went to eBay and they have a lot of them for $200 to $500. But one of them said Alpha DSLR, so I was like, is that an older model that still has the mirror? I see a lot of them are titling it as mirrorless, but this one was called a DSLR. So that's what I was wondering.
Could be. I don't know, 100% for that. Let's put it like, I've never seen one. So it doesn't mean they don't exist, but maybe they do. But also maybe the person posting it on eBay doesn't know the difference or doesn't care. They're just like, oh, it's a DSLR, let's just do it. Most people don't think about that. They're just like, oh, I want a Sony, do I want Sony, Panasonic, Nikon, or Canon? That's what most people look at. So the other thing about Sony's too is that, and again, I'm not, it might sound like I'm a big Sony fan and I'm bashing Canon, but I'm really not, because I do like Canon too. I don't like their cinema cameras, but I do like their still cameras. Sony is not worried about basically competing with themselves. So for example, they're going to make these high-end cameras, really high-end broadcast and digital cinema cameras that have all the bells and whistles, but are super expensive. But they know that there's a whole group of people, students, beginning filmmakers, corporate, video production, they can't afford $30,000 to $40,000 cameras, or even $20,000, or even $10,000 cameras. So they're not afraid of taking some of the technology that came out in this world, the high-end world, and letting it trickle down into their digital affordable cameras, let's put it that way. So things like S-Log, which is log format, which was found in their flagship Cinealta cameras, finds its way into their Alpha series. Some of the tools, like the exposure tools, focusing tools, all that stuff finds its way into the Alpha cameras. Maybe not perfectly reproduced like in the higher end cameras, but some form of it in there, which then brings the production value or the quality of what the camera is capable of doing to a higher level. Codecs, higher end codecs. Remember, I don't think we talked about it yet. We didn't talk about 422 or 420 or different types of compression that you would use to compress the files. Normal cameras like this guy, Rebel, not bad, but it's not going to have the higher end formats to record in. It's still going to make a good image. It's still going to get the job done, especially if you don't have a lot of money and you're starting out. Well, yeah, something is better than nothing. But some of the higher end Sony cameras, even the Alpha still cameras, mirrorless cameras, are going to have these higher codecs in that are going to allow you to do much more elaborate color correction in post. This camera doesn't do log, but most of the Sony Alphas will record in log. And we haven't talked about that yet, and we will briefly talk about it. But when you record in log, you have way more latitude and way more color manipulation capabilities in post when you start color grading and color correcting your images. So there's a lot of stuff under the hood that might be more advantage to one of those cameras, and also what you can clearly see, like the ergonomics, the way it works, that to me still makes Sony the leader in affordable still cameras. Now that doesn't mean that Canon doesn't have them. They just released a couple cameras that are wonderful, but they're now you're looking at $4,000, $5,000. When we cut to the chase down to sub $1,000 cameras, in my personal opinion, right now Sony's the leader because they give you more bang for your buck, they give you more options than everybody else. Someone's like, well, how about Panasonic? Panasonic rocks too. Like Panasonic's number 2. In fact, if I was really choosing still a DSLR form factor camera, I may buy a Panasonic because some of their newer cameras are just fantastic. Also, here's the other tip too. If you're looking to buy used, you can definitely get a used Panasonic. I'm trying to remember what number I think would be great. GH models, the GH4. It's a pretty impressive camera that you can get dirt cheap now on eBay or used. In fact, I wouldn't go to eBay. I'd go to some of the professional ones that are used. That might work. So if you're looking used, Panasonic's not bad. They're all pretty good, but Panasonic, they were the forefront on making DSLR form factors or mirrorless cameras that were more geared towards video production than still cameras. The only weird thing about them is that most of their cameras up until recently were micro 4/3 inch. So which meant that you couldn't just put regular lenses on it. You'd have to get an adapter to put it on. But in the long term, if you went to buy a used camera, let's say you bought a used Panasonic GH4 or GH5 that was micro 4/3 inch, you can buy an adapter that you can put all of the regular full frame lenses on there and not have it crop the sensor. And you might like, what are you talking about? I'll talk about that a little bit later. Sorry, not crop the sensor, but cut down on the focal length because the sensor is too small for the lens. And now that's people might look at me crazy because that's a little bit more information, but we will talk about that stuff a little bit. So you can find good stuff used. The only thing I would tell you guys is I would try to avoid eBay because the problem is you don't know the condition of these cameras, and unless eBay might say, well, don't worry about it because if you buy with eBay, they have that money back policy. Don't trust it because I've gotten ripped off. I bought something and it wasn't what I wanted, and I tried to return it and I battled them through eBay, and guess what? I lost. And I was totally in the right. So you have to be careful. Don't take if someone's like, oh, well, don't worry about it. I don't give a money back return, but you can just file a claim with eBay. Then you might not get your money back. So where else can you go? Well, you can go to like Sammy's Camera, go to B&H Photo. So Adorama has a huge selection of used stuff. B&H Photo has used stuff. Sammy's has used stuff. So why buy from these guys? Well, because they're basically a retail outfit. They're known entity, right? And they do warranty their stuff. So if you buy a used camera from Adorama, for example, they will give you a 30-day money back guarantee. They will guarantee, like if they say this is the condition it's in and you get it, it's not in that condition, you'll get your money back. You can return it. If you do it on eBay, or if you do a Craigslist deal where you meet someone at Starbucks and get the camera off them, that can work too, but you have to really know what you're looking at. You have to make sure that the camera is fully functioning, because once you do the deal, it's gone, right? You're not going to get the money back. And I've bought cameras off of Craigslist before, but I'd buy stuff that I know and I fully test it out before I buy it to make sure it's working. So that's where you probably get your best deals on Craigslist, but it's buyer beware market. If you're not 100% comfortable doing that, then I suggest looking at these 3 places to buy used equipment and know that you're not going to get taken advantage of or get ripped off.
Is the Panasonic series nicknamed Lumix? Because I see one.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see it for Adorama for Lumix, and it's for pretty much the same price that the eBay had the Sony ones, but the Sony ones are more expensive on Adorama. But the Panasonic ones are the same price.
Yeah, Panasonic are going to drop in price because they're micro 4/3 inch, and don't get all caught up on it, because between micro 4/3 inch and say full size sensors, we'll talk about the differences coming up. But I've shot plenty of stuff with those cameras. It looks amazing. And like I said, you can get an adapter that it will allow you to shoot with regular lenses that'll work fine. It's just a little weird and a little bit not weird. It's just an extra thing you got to put on the camera. It just becomes part of the camera, not a big deal. So again, last thing I'll say about all this is that do your research, do your homework. Don't just, get excited and say, I'm just going to buy something and pick something and do an hour of research, because you want to make sure whatever you're investing in, even if it's, you're buying it used, you still want to use it for a while and you still want to get your investment back out of it. So you don't want to get something and you realize, oh man, this doesn't quite do what I thought it was going to do. And the last thing I'm going to say about all these cameras, especially the sub $1,000 market, because it's considerably a cheap camera, there is going to be compromise somewhere. The reason, a Sony, high-end camera like a Venice, which is like a $50,000, $60,000 camera, all that technology is not going to fit inside an alpha camera. Doesn't matter what they do, because either A, it wouldn't fit with all the processing, or B, it would jack the price up. So that means there's going to be some compromise somewhere. So every camera system, low-end camera system, is going to have some limitations, something about it, which like, oh, wow, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. And so as a consumer, as someone potentially going to buy a piece of equipment that you're going to use, you need to really do your homework and research it. And that might mean reading the reviews. That might go on to some websites, web blogs, where people, that's what they do, is they use equipment. There's a few of them out there that are really specific towards this type of digital low-end digital cinema cameras, and really will talk about the advantages and disadvantages. YouTube, you'll find a dozen people reviewing stuff, anything you can imagine. I'm not telling you anything you guys don't know, but all I'm saying is that you want to totally research it to make sure it meets the needs that you want. So this kind of then comes back to the question of, well, what do we get? How do I know what to get? And so this starts off with the budget. What's the budget? How much can you afford? The second thing I would do is make a list of what I need. What is it that I want to do with this camera? Do I need being able to have manual follow focus? Do I need to be able to put accessories on it? Do I want long battery runtime? Do I want the camera to be able to record long duration? What do I need for the first production or whatever it is I'm doing? And then once I figure out what I need, then I can say, okay, what's the components that I need? Do I need a tripod right now? Do I need a matte box right now? Do I want an external monitor? Do I want a follow focus? What type of lenses do I think I need to use on this camera? Make that list. And then once you get that list, then you can start reducing that list down to going, okay, this is the amount of stuff I need to buy, but I can only afford to buy this much stuff. That doesn't mean I want to throw this stuff away. It just means I got to break this up into chunks. So if this is all the stuff I really need to shoot with, but I can only afford to buy this, what amount of things am I going to buy first? The basic things that I need. Usually that comes down to camera body, lens, obviously media, and maybe some way of stabilizing the camera, whether it's a tripod, a handle, a gimbal, whatever. Maybe I want to buy some ND filters, because ND filters are, remember we talked about how important that is to use outdoors when you're shooting to get shallow depth of field. So maybe set of ND filters is important too. So I can put all that as stage one of the buy, that I could still use the camera and shoot, and then save some more money, or maybe I get a couple gigs that I get paid to work, and then I can take that money and then reinvest it into stage two, where I'm having some more of the stuff I need, and then maybe stage three later on when I have even more stuff I need. And theoretically, by the time you get to that level, you might be ready to move on to another camera. Maybe you get more work. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you outgrew it. There's plenty of things to consider. But the bottom line is that you want to get something. If you're going to make an investment, get something you can afford now and start shooting, because it's really important just to be shooting. And then you can always upgrade later on. You can always swap it out. I guarantee you, camera bodies, they come and go. I've gone through 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm on my fifth camera right now, camera body in cinema cameras. And that one now is time to go. The red camera, I've had a red camera for since they first came out. It's getting time to upgrade it, because now I've maxed it out to what it's capable of doing. And now people are looking to do more advanced stuff that it doesn't capable of doing. So now I have to think about making that investment. But I didn't get caught up in constantly buying stuff. I buy something, use it for the duration until it's not usable anymore. And that either it breaks or it just gets outdated and doesn't, and it's the technology is too old and everybody's expecting something else. But you got to think of this as more of a path that you go through, maybe a little bit of a journey for your stuff. And I know that's kind of a lame answer to what to buy, or I can just say, hey, everybody buy a Sony 6400. There, we're done, right? It's really each person has to figure this out on their own. You can definitely consult, like what I've done, what I usually do when people ask me what to buy, whether it's companies or friends or other people or students, it's how much money you have at first. And then from that amount of money, what do you need? And then just break it down and then do it. And then I can give recommendations based on that amount of money. But in the end, that's the first step. It's great if you're like, wow, I really need a brand new red camera because that's what I want to shoot in and that's what I'm going to need. But if you don't got, if the red camera body costs $25,000, you still need another $10,000 to $20,000 of stuff to make it work. So now you're looking not at $25,000, but say $35,000 to make it work. And so if you can't even afford that, then you can't even be thinking about that realm. You have to think about scale it back into something that works in your price budget. And there's always room to move up there. And the other thing too is as you progress in your whatever you're doing, independent filmmaking, or say you do video production and get paid to do it, you can always rent equipment. You can always rent the things you can't afford and use them. But renting all the time also isn't that great because A, you don't get to have the equipment in front of you to play around with. And then B, you know, that's an expense that you have to, you know, build into your budget for whatever you're doing. That make sense?
Now that everything is in like 4K, how important is it to actually utilize like a 4K camera, or is that just done, say, like in Adobe?
No,
8K, right?
we could talk a little bit about that. And so 4K is predominantly the new standard now. So anybody watch Netflix?
Yeah.
Nobody watches Netflix, really? Yeah, you're crazy. Their standards are 4K. TV, the standards right now are 1080, but the new broadcasting advanced television 3, yeah, that's it. ATV 3 is coming out probably in the next 2 years. 4K transmission. YouTube, 4K. Everything, every streaming service now, 4K. HBO Max. Doesn't mean every piece of content in there is going to be 4K, but that's what they want to be shot at now. So when you start considering the idea that you're going to create some content that is going to have a shelf life and actually is going to be used or broadcasted or, you know, streamed for the next 10 years, you can't shoot in 1080. It has to be 4K because the standards are evolving. In fact, the standards 4K is we're already halfway through 4K, and we're going to soon be seeing in the next 5 to 10 years 8K televisions coming online because the new ATV3, which is the standard of transmission over airwaves, supports 4K and 8K. You will see once everybody's internet speeds get even faster, you're going to see Netflix and all the other streaming services shifting to 8K. So what that means is 1080 is on its way out. 4K is now the standard. Almost every camera nowadays supports 4K. Unless it's an older camera, it should out of the box support 4K. So that doesn't mean you have to shoot 4K. So for example, in this class, we're not shooting 4K. We're going to stick 1080 because depending on your computers, because it's not just the camera that you need to consider with 4K. You need to consider the computer and the workflow. If you've got an older computer, an older Windows computer that may crawl with 4K footage, then if you're not going to be able to edit it properly, then that might be a problem. So the good news is most newer computers, if you're buying a computer in the last 3 or 4 years, that's a decent computer, it should handle it. without a problem. So what I would say is if you have newer technology computers, you have a decent camera, there's probably no reason not to shoot 4K. And specifically, if you're doing something for the film festival or doing something that's going to have legs, which means it's going to be around for a while, not like a quick project like what we're going to do in this class, you definitely want to consider shooting 4K. Lots of stuff to talk about. You can see we could sit here and round robin all day talking about cameras and all the technology and theory, which I encourage you guys, because I didn't know when I was in college. We never had this chance to like talk to experts and people who've been in business industry and know. We're just like, okay, what's what the book said? Okay, so yeah, this must be what it is. And back then there was one standard, NTSC. Today, the standards are all over the place. There's different formats, there's different resolutions, there's tons of different things. And most importantly, it's all changing, constantly changing. The formats that their TVs are accustomed to right now, Rec 709, it's out the door, man. Rec 2020 is in. New thing. And you're like, what's Rec 2020? What's Rec 709? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But anybody have a newer TV, 4K TV? Anybody heard of Dolby Vision? Dolby Vision is basically the new standard. It's replacing the old standard. And the old standard's been around since it got standardized in 1998. And so it's been around. And the standard before that was NTSC, and that got standardized in 1945, I think. So they've been around a while. So these new ones are coming out. And so the cool thing is most cameras can handle all this stuff right out of the box. So let's shift gears now. And we'll definitely have opportunity to talk more about cameras. We'll see if we got more time. I just want to get through everything today, and if we got more time, then I'll open up another Q&A at the end of today. All right. So the first thing I'm going to talk about today is the next assignment, which is assignment number 1. So let me share my screen with you guys. So first one we're going to do is cinematic composition still shoot. Okay. So this is due on the 26th. So like a week and a half from now. You're going to shoot at least 50 images. And now I want to remind everyone, this is still, we're working with still right now. I know you're like, oh, come on, we should be shooting video right now. But no, we're going to do still first, because in the past, when I taught this class, I didn't focus too much on composition as much as I should have. And I ended up getting a lot of first projects that were just all over the place. They looked like, security camera footage. The editing was terrible because everybody was just so gung-ho getting a camera and shooting, and forgot about stepping back and thinking about composition, thinking about these shots that we talked about last class, medium shots, screen close-ups, wide shots, long shots, cowboys, all that stuff. So now I'm doing this first assignment. And so you can still use your camera, but it needs to be in the still mode. And don't worry, we will be going into video fairly soon. So this first assignment, you need to have at least shoot 50 images using the still functions of your camera. And what I want to see from you guys is examples of frame sizes, wide shots, close-ups, medium shots, and incorporating all aspects of design elements in there. So remember, these frame sizes are specific. So please use the guides that I showed you guys in class about what a close-up is, what a cowboy is, what a medium shot is. We want to keep to the same dialect that the rest of the industry does. That doesn't mean it needs to be measured with a ruler precisely, but it needs to feel like it should. An extreme close-up feels like an extreme close-up. It's not a close-up. A cowboy shot is a very specific shot. Long shot definitely has the same thing there too. So you want to do this. You want to use those rules of third. Remember, we just don't want everything centered. We don't want looking like snapshots in the crosshair, right? Everybody's head dead center of the frame. You can do centered stuff, but make sure everything is, has symmetry in it, stuff that makes it work. If not, stick to the rules of third. You don't have to create a sequence here. We're not creating a short movie. We're not doing that yet. It is just demonstrating that you understand the idea of what framing is in good composition. So don't worry about making a sequence. Do not, though, shoot the same subject with the same background for every shot submitted. So, for example, don't sit here and go, all right, I'm going to do my assignment. Hey, stand right over there next to that chair. Okay, click, zoom in, click, zoom and click. All right, I'm done. Man, that was a lot of work. Got it done. Don't do that. Break it up. Do different backgrounds. Try different things. This is all about experimentation, right? And this is all about, like, think of this as a rehearsal. It's like a one stepping stone getting ready to do your first project. And so if you're already experienced, you're like, man, this is baby stuff. I already know how to do this. Just humor me and just do it anyway. If you are already at that level where you feel you're that good, then why don't you show me some images that are going to knock my socks off and make me go, wow, that's unbelievable. That's what I want to see. I want to see amazing light. I want to see great composition. Start thinking about that stuff now. Don't shoot, like I said, don't shoot the same subject with the same background. So this purpose of this assignment is to create examples of cinematic composition that show me that you know what I talked about, that you're like, okay, I didn't just sit there and watch Netflix on the side while you were rambling on like a crazy person. So I want to see it. So what do you need to turn in? Minimum 10 still shots. And so they need to have a variation. So break up the size of the shots, break up the backgrounds, make stuff different. You don't have to have a different subject every time. It's okay if you have one person that's going to help you out and that's it. And that's what you got to work with. That's okay, but just don't pick one wall and shoot everything there. I've had people do this project where they just basically took their phone and went click, 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 and that was it. And it looks like a bunch of snapshots. I don't want to see stuff that looks like snapshots. You guys are in here to learn filmmaking. So I want to see stuff that leans in that direction, that feels like there was thought put in the composition. Shallow depth of field. If you can do that, play around with that and experiment with it. Show me stuff that looks like something that looks like a film. That's what I'm looking for. Now, what about lighting? We're not talking about lighting right now. So I'm not expecting stuff lit, but I am expecting you to be considerate of light. So if you're going to use natural lighting, don't just pick the flattest light and shoot. Don't use the flash on your camera. We're going to talk about making sure the settings are proper in your camera today. But think about lighting. One of the things I'll tell you, the trick I'll think, backlighting is your friend. Anything that's got backlighting or side lighting is going to look cinematically better than front lighting. So what I mean by front lighting, well, if I'm shooting my camera like this and the sun is behind me here going this way on my subject, that's front lighting, and that's boring. So if I'm going to shoot outdoors and it's sunny out and the sun's back here, well, I'm going to spin around, put my subject there and have them with the sun behind them. Or I'm going to put them over here with the sun over here and shoot this way so the sun's coming sideways. Start looking at lighting. Even if you're not using practical lights, I'm sorry, not using, studio lighting, think about the natural lighting in your environment, whether it's outdoors, whether you're in a room somewhere, look around, go, oh, what's the lighting doing here? What's going on with my face here? Like if I look in this room, if I turn out my lights, except for I have one little light panel bouncing off the ceiling. Look how moody I just made it, right? This side of me is a lot darker, right? Just made it a little more cinematic just by turning off some of the lights in here. I do that trick all the time. If I want to make something look moodier and I don't have a lot of lights to work with, boom, I'm going to turn some lights off and get that feeling going. And turn these back on. So think about the lighting environment. So minimum 10 shots, that's all I'm asking for to upload. You should be shooting around 50, minimum. If you shoot more than that, even better. Don't just shoot 10 shots and say, I'm done. If you're not shooting at least 50, you're not putting the energy into it. So shoot 50, shoot 100, shoot 500, whatever it takes, whatever you want to do. You're going to give me the 10 best shots. And then in these, you want to make sure I have examples of something like wide shots, medium close-up, extreme close-up. I wanted to see the range so that you could show me some cool stuff. And again, don't worry about putting it in a sequence right now. It's not about making a sequence. You're going to upload these stuffs with the link in the assignment. All shots will be properly labeled. So you want to make sure you have a label on it. Just rename it, each individual one. I'm going to talk about bridge today a little bit, how to use that. But you want to relabel it. And also, please, only MPEGs, no RAW files right now. Even if you do want to shoot RAW, just convert it to JPEG. If you don't know how to do that, just send me an email or a text later on and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you kind of explain how to do it? And I'll run it through with you. Any questions so far?
So we
Yeah,
need- oh, sorry. So we need to have access to a DSLR for this assignment?
No. So here's the thing. Obviously, a DSLR would be great to have because you're going to be able to do much more than you can with this guy right here. But if you can't get access to DSLRs, and I'm not sure that you're going to get access this week, it's not a deal breaker. It's not the end of the world. You can do this assignment with this phone and still make it look cool. So it just means you're going to work a little bit harder. And, you know, especially if you have an older phone, then yeah, that's going to be a little bit tougher. If you have a newer one, you can use stuff like the portrait mode to get shallow depth of field and stuff like that. Plenty of students have done this assignment on their iPhones and Android phones, and it looked cool. In fact, some of them look pretty damn amazing. So that's the deal here. Oh, wait a second here. Amber just texted me. Let's see what she has to say here. She sent me the checkout procedure. All right, so after class, I'm going to post it. And then that'll be, maybe some people will get access to the camera sooner than later. Yay. So any other questions? Somebody else had a question.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I had seen it say 50 images on the DSLR, so that's my question was pretty much similar to hers. Did we have to take 50, but you said 10, 10 of the best of our 50, and the DSLR. But that was gonna.
Yeah, remember, you shoot at least 50 images. That's what we're saying here. I don't want your 50. I don't want your 100. I want your 10 best. But you need to shoot at least 50. If you're not, then you're not experimenting. Think of this as an experimentation. This is all about, okay, I watched your presentation. I sat through your boring lecture and listened to you ramble on. Let me think about what you said. Is there anything I can apply here? Can I do vectors in here? Can I find something that has contrast and use that? Can I think about frame within a frame and do that? Shoot somebody through a window or a car window. All those things. If you get time to look back at it or go through the material again, take a look, because that's what this is all about. And think of this as just stage one. And then once from here, it's just going to get more complicated. We've got one more project like this, and then we're boom, going into the big project, the first big project. So these are all here designed to help you succeed in that midterm and that final project, because that's what I want to do is sit back with you guys and on the screening days and watch some awesome films. That's what we want to see. And so these are the steps to get there. Make sense?
I actually had one more question.
Okay.
The photos, do the photos all have to have people in it? Because I know subjects can be different things. Can the subject be something that exists, and that's what we're trying to highlight with it?
They do not have to necessarily have people. I'd like you to have a couple images that have people in it, just so that, because in the end, when we make movies and stuff, it's really about people, not just about objects. So you can do wide shots, right? Extreme wide shots or long shots don't have to have people in them. You can shoot some objects, but at least give me something in there that has a couple people in there, just so I know you can know what a cowboy shot is or how to frame a close-up. Because in the end, that's what these shots are all. It's all about shooting people performing or documenting somebody doing something. In the end, are there films out there that have nothing to do with people? Yeah, there's wildlife documentaries, but when you look at those, they're still doing the same thing. They're still doing close-ups, wide shots, all the same thing. Are there landscape-only images? Yeah, certainly. I can think of two at least. Koyaanisqatsi and Baraka. Baraka is one of my favorite. I have a lot of landscapes, and they're just beautiful. So it's not up to interpretation, but you understand what I'm saying. This is going to be due on the 26th, which is the night before, I believe, of when we're going to critique them. So just get them done. And what's the important thing about this assignment to do?
We have to have examples of all the close-up, all the shots from the, no?
Have fun. Should be having fun. Making movies, right? We're going to make movies. You're going to have fun. All right. Let's move on. So let's talk a little bit about still camera basics. Just want to get this is kind of like a quick crash course into the still functions in your camera, just to make sure you're in the right way of setting so you don't struggle in this assignment. And everything that we talk about in the still part of today will translate over to when you put it in motion mode. So things we're going to talk about: shutter speed, aperture, exposure, motion blur, f-stop, aesthetics, light meter, point of view, all this good stuff. So without spending an hour or two talking about how cameras work, basically there's two parts of the camera system that control exposure, and that is going to be the shutter and the aperture. And so when I combine those two things together, it's going to allow me to control what my exposure is. Now, what did I say about shutter, if you guys remember from last week? What's the problem using shutter to control exposure? What does the shutter do to the image? If you look at the second thing right here.
Oh, okay. It affects the motion in the image.
Right? Remember, you guys remember the magic number? We said 150, right? I mean, no, 180, which equals 1/50th of a second, is normal motion blur for us. So when we shoot, we have to keep it within 180 if we want it to be normal. If we go above 180, it's going to become more dreamlike, right? In motion blur. If I go under it, it's going to become more staccato, more realistic, more, kind of gritty. So in the still world, I can use the shutter to help me control exposure, and it's not really going to cause too much of a problem. And in this assignment, if you do want to make the challenge and try to keep the shutter where it's at and treat it like a normal cinema shutter, you can. But if that might be difficult, because if you don't have neutral density filters and all the other things it might come into, or a way to fully manually control your camera, you might have some problems. So for this assignment, I'm not requiring that everybody has to keep the shutter at 180 degrees. You can use the shutter to control exposure in this assignment because it's still shots. It would be cool to see if you kept the motion blur in there, but it's not required. So if shutter controls the timing, right? How long the shutter stays open, how much light is collected in a given amount of time. The aperture is going to control how much the lens is open to let as much light in. And so the f-stop is going to, again, affect us creatively by depth of field. Remember, we talked a little bit about that. So remember, the bigger the f-stop opening, the more shallow the depth of field is going to be, and the more background is going to be out of focus. So if you're outdoors shooting and you want to have shallow depth of field, unless you have neutral density filters to put in front of the lens, you're going to have to use the shutter to control the exposure, or everything's going to be overexposed. So in here, that's okay to do for this assignment. You can let the shutter run, or vice versa. If you really want to freeze some motion or get a motion blur, well, then you can let the f-stop handle the exposure issues, which means it'll go to a higher number, like f16, f22, to get if you're outdoors. So depth of field, again, we talked about that. That's the amount of in focus between 2 points. And usually it's a point that you focus on and what's in the background. It also kind of affects the foreground, but mostly when we talk about depth of field, we're talking about the background, how much that's out of focus. Light meter, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but that helps us read normal exposure. But here's the piece that you need to know. So I suggest you download this or print this out and look at it. Here's going to be your cheat sheet for this assignment to figure out exactly what to use depending on what you want to do. So most of these cameras are going to have a dial right here that's going to be the shooting modes that you can set the camera into. And so if you look at most of them, they're going to have a whole bunch of stuff here. They're going to have manual, they're going to have aperture, shutter, program, full, portrait, landscape, a bunch of these things. Most of these we're going to ignore. We're only going to focus on about 3 or 4 of them, and that's it. So the first one we're going to talk about is this one called AV, and that's on Canon. Canon's going to have AV. On Sony, and I think on Nikon, it's just going to be A for aperture. So this is basically a half automated mode. So remember I said in the beginning, when we're going to shoot video, we're going to shoot in manual mode, right? Everything's going to be in manual. But for this assignment, you can go in manual, and I encourage you to try and play around in manual if you want. But if that becomes too much of an issue trying to get this assignment done, because this is not about, the assignment's not about mastering the controls fully of the camera, like of exposure. It's more about just learning to compose shots better. So I don't want you to be caught up in that and have problems. So instead of forcing everybody to go into manual mode, you can use some of these modes to work in that are semi-manual. So this first one, it's going to be aperture priority. And so in this one, when you dial into the AV or A on Sony and Nikon, the camera is going to allow you to pick an f-stop you want to shoot at. So you can dial whatever you want, whether, you can dial it right on the back of the camera, or and some cameras have it on the side. Everybody's camera is going to be a little bit different. And what it's going to do is allow you to lock whatever f-stop you want to shoot at. Say I want to shoot at 2.8. Let's set it at 2.8. And then the camera is going to use the shutter to properly expose your image so that you're not overblown. And so, yeah, that means the motion, if we were shooting this, if we use this mode in a video mode, it would be a bad thing to do, because the shutter would constantly be changing based on exposure, and it would mess up the motion blur constantly. So in a motion world, we don't want to use that. But in a still world, we can get away with it. So if I want to worry about shallow depth of field, and I want to have a shallow depth of field, that means I want to open up my exposure. I want to have a larger aperture, which means a smaller number, like a 2.8 or 2, or if you're even lucky to have a 1.4, then this mode is going to allow me to get shallow depth of field. Think of it that way. Think of aperture priority is going to be allow me to get depth of field or deep depth of field, depending on what I want. So if I'm shooting a medium shot of somebody and I want to have the background all soft, I put this in aperture priority, and I set the lens to whatever its widest opening is going to be, whether that's going to be 2.8. Some of these cameras with the kit lens, it only goes to 4, f4. So whatever it's open as it's going to go is what I'm going to use. And I should be able to get a shallow depth of field. If I'm shooting a big vista, right? Let's say I'm shooting an extreme wide shot or a long shot, and I want to show this whole area, this part of the city. Well, I probably want to not be shallow depth of field. I probably want to have a deep depth of field for everything. So then I'm going to go into the camera here and set this up to f16 and then shoot. And then, so even if I set it to f16, the camera is going to use the shutter to automatically adjust the exposure. So in a nutshell, aperture priority, AV, is the main one I should use for this assignment, if I care mostly about depth of field. If I want shallow or deep, if I leave it in here, it'll handle the exposure for me. And I just focus on whether I want deep depth of field or shallow depth of field by where I set the iris or the f-stop. Now, this is not going to automatically set the ISO of the camera. I'm still going to have to do that. So if I'm shooting outdoors, you can write this down, you probably want anything 200 ISO or smaller, because you want it to make the camera less light sensitive so that it doesn't have to work so hard. So if I'm outdoors, broad daylight, 200 or slower. If I'm indoors, it's probably anywhere between 800 and 1,000 for being inside. Around that area should give you a decent exposure. And when you start working indoors at nighttime, you want to be careful about, the shutter is going to be controlled by the camera. So it's going to start getting bigger and bigger when it gets darker and darker, which means that if you get to some point, you're going to have lots of motion blur in your shots, even if you're just shooting a still image. So that might mean that you might want to put something on a tripod or put the camera static if you're in a super low light scenario and your camera is not that light sensitive and your lens is slow, which means it doesn't open up to a really fast stop. So if I'm outdoors, 200 and less. Indoors, or like normal kind of indoor lighting, 800 to 1,000. And if I'm going nighttime outdoors, depending on how dark it is, I'm going to go anything above 1,000, whatever I can get out of it. Some cameras only go up to 1,200, 1,500, 1,600. Some go all the way up to 64,000. It's all up to you. And obviously, the more ISO you turn up, the more noise you're going to get in your images. So you want to kind of balance that out. And quite honestly, if you get to a super low light level, I probably would put the camera in manual and just start experimenting with everything to see how I can go. You can still leave it in aperture priority and it'll still get the job done. But you're going to have to manually adjust the ISO. So next setting is going to be shutter priority. So in here, it's the opposite. So in TV, which stands for time value, it's going to allow me to choose a shutter speed that I want to work at. So if you're like, you know what, I just want to shoot at 180-degree shutter speed, which means I want to shoot at 1/50th or 1/60th of a frame rate, a shutter speed, then it's going to lock that in to you, what you set, and then it's going to use the f-stop to control the exposure. So this might be cool if you want to mess around with capturing fast motion. You want to freeze some object in the air or water moving, or maybe the opposite. Maybe you want to have motion blur. Maybe you want to go out nighttime and shoot the traffic go into downtown and get those streaking lights and turn the shutter up really long to a long shutter speed. So like, if I get it down to 1/8 of a second or 1/4 of a second, I can get these really long motion blurs. That could be fun to do, to play around with. If you do that, if you get to that long shutter modes, guess what you're going to need? One of these. You're going to need a tripod, because if you here's the other thing you want to write down. Any shutter speed under 1/60th of a second or less, let's say, well, we'll get away with because 1/50th is what we would use if we're doing 24 frames. So let's say under 1/50th, anything like 1/40th and under is going to create a lot of motion blur, and it's going to start making your images look soft and out of focus. So that means if I want to shoot someone standing there, let's say I got someone standing in front of me, I set the camera to 1/15th of a second shutter speed, and they're waving their hands like this to create a motion blur thing. But if I'm hand holding the shot, even if I'm really good, and let's say I take the camera, I take my elbows, lock them into my chest, jam the camera in my face, hold my breath, and take a really good, long shot, there's still this little bit of motion that my body, even if I'm super perfectly still, my heartbeat goes through my body and will shake the lens. And so you'll get that little motion blur in your whole image. And that might make it look blurry and out of focus. So anytime I'm shooting anything under 1/40th, and I want to make a motion blur shot where the subject's just blurry and the background is in focus, I got to have a tripod, or I got to put the camera down on the ground or something. I got to stabilize the camera and not just my own body. And if you're like, well, I'm pretty good at hand holding, you just won't be. I can't. I've tried it. I can get away with sometimes I'll lean against the wall and put my weight against the wall and hold still like that to help, and that can help, but it's only good for a certain, maybe down to 1/20th a second, maybe 1/15th if I'm super, super lucky and I didn't drink any coffee and I'm leaning against the wall. That might work. Normal circumstances, tripod, put the camera on something. Even if I take a jacket and put the jacket on something and put the camera on and use the jacket to kind of adjust the height or tilt or level it, that could work. So for me, for this assignment, I would probably say stick more towards using the aperture priority, because that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish here, like shallow depth of field, stuff like that. You can use shutter priority to play around with and try, some, long exposure, long shutter stuff, or fast shutter if you want to freeze motion and make it cool and play around. So those can work. The next two, and these I'm going to kind of talk about real quick, is the green square. Every camera has this thing, the full auto green square. In this mode, the camera automatically sets the aperture, the shutter, and the ISO to automatically control the exposure. The flash will probably go off. You have no control in this mode. This is the mode, this is the point and shoot mode. This is the, hey, I want to do a selfie, and I don't have a selfie stick, okay. Type of mode. This is the mode where if I'm at Disneyland and I've got kids running around, I just want to get a shot, I don't care. you want to stay away from this mode. This is going to give you the least cinematic images because the flash is going to go off. It's going to give you no control whatsoever on your images. So I would totally stay away from this. In fact, I rarely, unless I'm really, really just quickly trying to get a shot super fast and it's not anything that I care about, I'm never, ever going to put it in the green square. If I want full control automation on the camera, instead of going to the green square, I'm going to go to this P mode, which is program. And so in this mode, it's very similar to the green square, but there's some differences. And the first one is that the flash doesn't go off. So it's not going to flatten out and make my images look boring. The second thing is it gives me control over the ISO. And I can use something called exposure compensation. We're not going to talk too much about that in this class, but we will talk about this. So if I just want to put it in auto mode, and I don't want to play around with aperture priority or shutter priority, I put it in P mode, not the green square. And so in that mode, the camera is going to do the exposure on its own, but I will have to set the ISO. And I think that's fine because you still want control of it. If you let the camera control the ISO, you might get too noisy of an image than you want. So use this mode whenever you can over full auto. It's always going to be better. But you can't forget about setting your ISO. So for example, if your ISO set at ISO 200, because you're shooting all day outdoors and then you go at nighttime to go shoot and you forget to change your ISO and it's still at 200, well, guess what? You're going to get either images that are super dark, underexposed, or it's going to open up the shutter so long that everything's just going to be completely blurry and you're going to be like, my camera broke, it doesn't work, there's something wrong with it. No, the ISO needs to be turned up. So part of all this, is trying to get comfortable with your camera. And so think about this assignment not just as, all right, we're learning how to frame, yeah, big deal, learn how to do close-ups and medium shots, but also to get comfortable using the camera and understanding the different modes that it does. So not just for doing cinema and video and motion, but also if you want to shoot stills and shoot some better stills than what the manual modes in the camera are capable of doing. So the last one I'm going to talk about is manual mode. So if you put it in the M, this is full manual. Nothing is controlled by the camera whatsoever. This is the mode that I say we normally will shoot in whenever we're shooting video, because we're going to want to have control, complete exposure control and focus and everything on a camera. But I can do this for stills too. So here I have to control the shutter speed. I have to control the aperture and I have to control the ISO. And that's all those combined together are going to help me set my exposure. So having full control of the camera, this is going to give me the most creative control over my images. This is the way that I prefer to shoot whenever I can in still mode. If I'm shooting in video mode, I guarantee you I'm shooting in manual mode all the time. I'm never letting the camera control anything. Because one of the problems of leaving the camera in, say, shutter priority is that now the f-stop's going to breathe. So if I have a bright ceiling, the aperture is going to get small. And as I tilt down, it's going to get bigger. And what's that going to do? It's going to mess around with your depth of field and or it's going to start breathing and you can see it on your image. And we don't want that. So every time we're in video mode, we always are going to leave it in manual. If we're doing it in still mode, either go manual, P mode, shutter priority, or aperture priority. And these two based on what I want to do, whether I want to have shallow depth of field, then aperture priority. I want to control motion, have blurry motion, slow shutter speed or fast shutter speed. I'm going to put it in shutter priority. Any questions so far?
We were talking about an app that you can install on your phone that will.
Yep.
But yeah, what was that again?
So I will show it to you. So if we go to modules, smartphone, here we go. Yep, here, got it. So Filmic Pro is the video version. If I go to the website here, so they make that video app that I told you about that give you full control over it. It doesn't do still, but well, come on, app, open up. Thank you. But they do make an app that does the same thing for still motion. And this is the one, whenever I'm doing one of my still classes, this is what I recommend everybody use. So if you look here, this is Filmic Pro, made by the company Filmic. When I go over here, I've got something called First Light. That's the app that I'm looking for if I want to have manual control over my images. So it's very similar to Filmic Pro for motion, but it's for still. So it's going to give me focusing, peaking. I can see my focusing. It's going to give me tools for exposure properly, so I can see a lot of things that are in the other app. But it's also going to give me ISO and shutter priority modes. So it's going to give me manual mode, but it's going to give me these priorities where I can have it, where I can control the f-stop and control the shutter. Now, I will tell you that because these cameras don't have like real lenses, they don't really have like real f-stops or apertures. So it's a little more limiting on what I can do here compared to one of these guys, because this has a real lens. But it doesn't mean you're not capable of taking cool images with here. You still can get away with it. I think you can even use the portrait mode in iPhones in this app. Yeah, I would check this one out. And this one's pretty cheap. I think it's like $6 or maybe even less. You should have it on your phone anyway. You should have some app that gives you manual control, whether it's this one or you pick something else. This is the only one that we recommend in the media arts photo department to use on your phones. Filmic Pro and Filmic First Light. So you can find it on the website there. So if I go to Apple, how much do they want for it? $8, so they raised it $1. But it's almost got 5-star ratings. This is probably one of the better ones out of all of them. And so you can, and also I believe that this one will allow you to take higher resolution, higher codecs, better codecs for your images too. So they're the company that I kind of stick with. Not too much more I want to kind of talk about today, but I'd rather, I could open this up now to any more Q&A questions, anything, kind of keep it an open forum discussion. Today's kind of be a little bit of a light day, but this is one of the few days that are going to be light. We've got a lot more stuff. Next class, we're going to get more into talking about Adobe Cloud. We're going to talk about computer specs, what do you actually need to edit like 4K, 6K, and 8K. And what's great about it is that conversation every year changes because of the technology. There's a big one coming today, obviously this year, sometime later in this quarter, specifically from Apple with their new silicone coming out. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a couple of other things. We're going to get a little demonstration of Bridge tomorrow. Next class. But so right now, you guys have any questions, generic questions, you name it. Now's your chance. This is one of the few times we have an open Q&A. Just throw it at me, whatever you got.
Yeah, how do I know if my computer can handle 4K editing?
Okay. I'll talk real quick about that, but we're going to talk a lot more about the great equipment next class. What do you have, first of all?
It is a 2015 MacBook Air.
Okay, not bad. A little old, but it will still probably get the job done. The thing about 4K, and one of the things why I don't do 4K workflows in this class, but I actually do that in the advanced class, is that there's a way to work with 4K on computers that aren't very powerful enough to handle it. And so if you're shooting raw 4K or 8K, almost every normal computer is going to break down and cry and not be able to handle it. If you're shooting DSLR 4K, that's really highly long GOP compressed, you can have potential that it's not going to work that well. So how do you get around that? Because the truth is, when you edit on a movie or specifically in a television series, so if we go, for example, and talk about post-production in a studio, let's say the show that I'm working on, the In Ice Cold Blood show, they have maybe about 10 plus editors working on the same material. The footage is shot, is brought into the post-production. An assistant editor is going to digitize it, or they're going to actually just ingest it. Nowadays it's called ingesting into the server. So they're going to have a big server that stores all the footage and all the files and everything that the avids need to work on these projects. And so if you've got say I got 12 episodes that are happening, right? So 12 episodes worth of footage, all this stuff's going to sit on this one server. There's going to be anywhere from 10 to 20 people accessing this information at once every day. So that's a lot of people to be putting stress on a server, right? So if they just shot everything at 4K and left it in 4K raw, imagine that trying to be pulled through the network, right? Imagine what would happen. Everybody would bog down. It wouldn't work. Even if they had super powerful computers, just getting the data off the server might not be that great. So what do they do to get around this? Well, the answer is they do something called proxy workflow, which means I'm going to shoot at whatever resolution I want. Let's say, for sake of argument, I'm shooting 4K raw workflow. I'm shooting raw 4K raw files. I'm going to bring that into my editor. So let's say I bring it into the Avid, or I'm going to bring it into Adobe Premiere. Once I ingest it into the system, into a project, I'm going to tell the software, whether it's Premiere, Final Cut, Adobe, doesn't matter. I'm going to tell it to take all these 4K big, super high resolution image files and turn them into a lower resolution version. So let's say I have these big 4K files. I'm going to turn them into 720p files, which are tiny little files. And they're going to have the same exact frame rate and the same length as the big files. They're going to definitely be a little more compressed. They're going to not look as good. You probably can't color correct them really properly to make them look good. But I can put those low resolution files on the server, and everybody can edit them with whatever computer they have, and the computer's not going to bog down. So that's called a proxy workflow. And that's how it's done all the time. Even if everyone has super fast computers, especially nowadays when most post-production facilities have sent everybody home with this high-speed internet, and they're all working offline from work. So instead of me, if I'm just editing and all I'm doing is editing, I'm doing editorial, which means I'm only worrying about making sure I pick the right frames, the shots, making sure they're edited correctly, and the sound, all that stuff. I don't need the full resolution versions. I just need to have something that I can see, make sure focus is there, make sure it looks good, make sure it sounds good, and I can edit with those. And I can literally take all of the footage, put it on a small drive, even if it's 100 episodes, and I've got, let's say I've got 500 hours of video. I can't put 500 hours of raw 4K video here, but I sure can put 500 hours of proxy 1080 or 720p footage on here and take it home and edit on my 2015 laptop without a problem. And then when I'm done with the edit, I'm going to go back to an edit station that's linked up to the server that has the full DaVinci or full, color correction capabilities into it. And I'm going to tell that software, once I load my project in, that I'm going to reconnect to all the 4K files. So it's going to be instead what it's going to do is, so if I have a timeline that has all the 720p files on it, I'm going to tell the software to swap them all out and replace them with the original files. Once it does that, boom, now I've got a timeline that is full resolution of what I originally shot. And then is when I'm going to do all the color correction, and when I'm going to do all of the, the final mastering and render it out to a full resolution. That's how it happens in the industry. That's what every single production does. I've never heard of any productions, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist, because there are exceptions to the rules, but for 90% of all productions done on the planet, they work in this proxy mode. So just because you have a slow computer doesn't mean you're screwed. It just means that you need to think about working in this mode. So we don't really go too deep into it in this class because it's still another level of information to process. So for you guys, I would say if you really got your heart set on shooting 4K, you can sidebar with me and I'll talk about how to do this in a simple way. So it's actually fairly easy to do in Adobe. than it is on some of the other workflows. There are downsides to doing this, so you have to be really careful. If you do special effects and you do all these certain animations and everything, you got to make sure it remaps properly over to 4K, because if you did everything in 720p and then now you're at a 4K, well, guess what? A lot of that stuff you program now is working in a tiny little frame at the bottom of your image instead of normal size. So it's not super automatic and super painless. You still have to do something called a reconforming pass. You just have to double check and make sure everything mapped across it properly. And even when I do it, when I work with people and I've color corrected and edited for people, we worked in a proxy workflow. And every time when I go back, I have to go through and make sure every single edit is exactly where it belongs. That kind of makes sense?
Yes, I didn't realize that you could convert it and then convert it back. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know you
Yeah.
could do that. Okay.
Yeah, and that was what made Avid the main app for all these years, because they were the only ones that could do that. Adobe didn't do it. Final Cut used to be able to do it, but it was kind of brutal process to do it. I think it was about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, that Adobe finally created a decent proxy workflow that worked for them. Apple, when they brought OS X online, they kind of had that built in already. They said, we're going to do it or automatically, but their old version 7, couldn't do it properly. So now it's become the norm. Almost every editor, whether it's Lightworks, Adobe, Final Cut, Avid, Vegas Pro, probably, they all do it now because it's just an industry standard. And this is not going to go away anytime in the future, because you're like, oh, well, everyone's going to have super duper powerful computers. No, because 4K is now outdated, because when we shoot movies now, people are now shooting 6K, 8K, right? Red cameras do 8K RAW. Blackmagic just recently announced that they've got 12K RAW cameras. So the Ks are just getting bigger and bigger. As the computers get faster, the K just gets bigger. The resolutions get bigger. So even though you've got that brand new, super fancy, super powerful Windows or Mac computer that you spent $10,000 on or even more, you still probably won't be able to get a full 8K workflow out of it without any problems. So you're probably going to have to create proxies, edit it, and then reconform back to it. It's just way more efficient, less room. You can edit on a laptop. There's so many reasons to do it versus not do it.
Would you say the same could work for a computer that's almost 10 years old, or would I need to borrow something from?
It could. It's all up to computers. I will say, it may sound a little biased, but on average, Mac computers, older Mac computers usually work. So for the longest time, I have a tower over there that was a Mac Pro from 2009 that I was cutting 6K RAW on without a problem, because they're built, you pay more money for them, but in the long run, they deliver for a longer amount of time. So most Macs, as long as you're not prior to, even if you have a 2012 Mac, it still can probably edit fairly decent. It's more about as long as it can support one of the last 2 or 3 operating systems, then it should work. So Windows is a little bit of a different story, because I'm not saying Windows sucks, because it doesn't, but what I'm saying is that Apple basically makes their operating system and makes their hardware, and it's all super intertwined. And in fact, now with the new app of the silicone, it's even more intertwined. So they get more performance and power out of their package. Windows, unfortunately, they're like the vanilla computers of the planet. Microsoft doesn't make the hardware, they just make the software. So one of the downsides to it, and we'll talk again a lot about this next class, is that they have to cater to all these companies. So if I've got 100 or 1,000 companies making Windows boxes to run Windows, computers to run Windows, I have to make sure that they're compatible with all of them, which means it's going to be way more code. It's going to be stuff that kind of just bogs it down a little bit more. And I know some people go, right, wait, I'm a gamer and my machine screams and all this stuff. Yeah, I know, I get it. But how many of you who are gamers plan to keep their gaming computer for 10 years and expect it to run a game in 10 years? I don't see anybody.
No.
Probably not. No, right? But I guarantee you, my laptop, and I'm not playing games on it, and they're two different, apples and oranges here. But if I'm talking about editing, I know that this Mac laptop that I have is good for another 9 years if I wanted to keep it. It may get old, it may get outdated, it may not run as fast with the newer software, but it will still be able to edit, still be able to get the job done because they're building the hardware and the software together, and they know that people, if they make something that's going to last a long time, and that's just basically how it works with Apple, it's going to last a while. But you're paying a premium for that. That's the downside. You're not going to get a cheap computer from them that just doesn't exist. But Windows, you can get that cheap computer really quick and get something in and work great for 4 or 5 years, maybe. But eventually you're gonna upgrade it. You're gonna have to change the cards out. You're gonna have to change the motherboard if you are a hacker or do DIY computer builder yourself. So it boils down to which path works better for you. And last thing I'll say about it is, you have to decide how much of your life do you want to be an IT person maintaining your computer, and how much of your life do you want to be a creative person doing creative stuff with your computer, and how does that balance out in your life? And that to me is the big difference. And I will tell you this, that Windows has come a long way. It's evolved. Windows 10 was not bad. It's pretty good. And Windows 11, we'll see where it's going with there. But they have come a long way from where they were in the Windows 98, Windows 95. Dare I say, anybody here remember Windows 3.1? Biggest joke on the planet. So it's not like they make a bad product. It's just that they're always playing catch up. And even when you look at the world of Linux versus Windows versus Mac, even Linux is like much more efficient with their stuff. But can you do as much with Linux that you can do with Windows? Gaming wise, no. Other stuff, maybe. But again, we'll talk more about this next class. Anything else? Any other questions?
Yeah, no, I just brought that up because my computer is a Dell. It is a Windows. It has Windows 10, but the last time I had talked to an IT guy, he said that the computer's about 2009. Since 2009, he said, and I know it's a dual core. I think i9, something like that, and it has like four gigs of RAM.
Yeah, I'll tell you just my quick personal opinion on that is it's probably underpowered for running Adobe. Most specifically, the RAM. But again, I'm going to save this discussion for next class because there's certain specifics we want to talk about, and we might run out of time today to do that. So let's save that, talking more about that and what you need to be able to properly edit on Wednesday. But anything else? Anybody else? Now's your chance.
So where would you start with like getting a PA job? Like your first, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, that's the tough cookie, right? How do you get in the door? How do they let you in? So remember, I think we talked about this, that the job of everyone in Hollywood is to keep the door shut so you can't get in. And what I mean by that is we're in the part of the world which still, even though, there's, work has moved to Georgia, Bollywood, every name, Florida, Canada is taking work away. In the end, we're still in the number one place where production happens. Even if the productions are going out of state, the headquarters is still here. All the companies that work are here. They're all here, most of them. So the work is still here. So most of the people who work in the industry, even if they're working outside, traveling, they're still based here. So what that means is everybody comes here. I did it. I moved out here to get in the industry. Everybody I know who's not from LA or from Southern California has moved here to be in the industry. So everybody's coming here to work. So that means these companies, there's huge competition here for jobs. And that's not to scare you. It's more just to if anything, inspire you or motivate you or get you going, is that the competition's high. So what they normally do is they're just not going to let anybody. It's not like, hey, I want a job and I want to learn how to be, work in production. Do you know anything? No. Well, sorry, because there's 10 other people who have more experience or knowledge or willingness to work that want to get in. So they basically build this wall, of no's. So every time you go somewhere and you try to apply for a job, you're just going to get no. It's going to be no. It's going to be no, 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 and then a bunch more no's, and then even more no's, and so many no's that what they're doing is and this is what my theory, and this is what I kind of talk to people about, is that they're saying no to so many people to get rid of the weak. They're trying to weed it out. They don't, because once someone comes in the door and they start getting involved and working, then the companies are kind of investing time and energy into these people. What they don't want is to invest into someone that's like 3 months in going, you know what? I decided I'd rather be a chef instead. And then they're like, great, now we got to start all over again with somebody. So there's a lot of no's up front. And when you first start out, it's going to be no. And you have to have a thick skin. You really do. And you can't take it personal. You just can't take it personal. And I did. When I first moved out here, I took it personal. I was like, I don't suck. I didn't think I suck, but these people obviously think I suck and I must suck. There must be something wrong with me. And it starts getting in your head. And no, that's not the case. The case is they're just trying to weed the weak out. So if you basically pester enough and you have to go outside of your normal behavior, you're like, oh, well, if someone says no, okay, well, I better not bother them anymore. That's the opposite of what you want to do. If you apply, so maybe you go and find all the production companies in LA, right? And you start making it like a list of this is what I did. I went and found every production company that I could find in LA. And then I just started calling them. Hey, this is my name. I'm looking for a job. I'd like to take a job. I'd like to be a camera assistant. I'd like to be a camera. Like, no, sorry, there's nothing here. Okay, no problem. I'll call you back in a week. A week later, I call them. Kept doing it over and over and over again. And then finally, someone's just going to break down and say, you know what? This person kept calling. They must really want to work in the industry to pester us that much. So I'm now going to say, all right, fine. Here's a chance to get in. Just stop calling me, please. And then you get your chance to get in. And so that's stage one. And so there's plenty of ways to do it. There's the cold calling thing where you got to find everybody's names. And it's not that hard. You can go online. There's websites out there that list all the production companies in LA. You can find them. They're out here in the valley. There's tons of them out here all over the place. You could even just cold call them, knock on the door. But you will get no at first, and you just got to get past that fear of the no. What you need to understand is the no is the norm. And you're like, okay, well, great. Yeah, I got your no. So I'm just going to wait. I'm going to bide my time and keep hitting you until I finally get my yes and get in. And so when you're first totally new to the industry, it's really hard to break through that wall. And you have to really put a lot of, elbow grease into it. Really, send out resumes. And resumes aren't that great because they're going to get them, it's more about making yourself known as a human. So that means cold calling is a lot better. Visiting is even better. I know somebody who pestered a couple of production companies. They went every week to their office and went to the receptions until finally the receptions got to know them and said, all right, you know what? I'll get you in to meet somebody. And then finally they got a chance. I've had, in other ways, I had people refer me, people pester me, and finally I'm like, all right, yeah, I'll let you in. I'll give you a shot. But once you get in the doorway, then comes that moment of truth. That's when you have to show the world who you are, or at least who you are to the people that you're working for. And that's when it comes down to this whole thing we talked about the first week about, work ethic, about doing whatever people ask. It's not just about, well, I got a PhD in cinematography and I'm so-and-so. Nope, nobody really cares. What they care about is that, do you listen? Do you follow instructions? Are you a team player? Are you going to work along the rest of us? And once they find that value in you, then suddenly it becomes, okay, well, this person, all these people kind of progress out to other companies. So we all work together on a show. On this show, when the show wraps, most people don't go on employment. Most people go to another company and work on another show. So as these people progress out to these other companies, somebody might say, hey, do you know any good PAs? And I'll be like, well, yeah, I just worked with somebody who was awesome on this last show. What's their name? Oh, here's their name. And then boom, you get referred. The network starts. And if you're that good that people, either you were really good or you were just great to work with, and all the above specifically, then your name starts going out. And before you know it, suddenly you're not like hunting for work. People are calling you to work. And then at some point that will move to the next phase where you're like, okay, well, I don't want to be a PA the rest of my life. Well, now I'm going to work to go in the camera department. No, you know what? Actually, I want to be writer producer. So I'm going to work more specifically with producers, and you start working your way up. But it all comes back down to this getting in the door thing, and not being afraid of the word no. Does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes.
So before the pandemic hit us, I used to bring a handful of students every year on set, and we'd go shoot while we're shooting. And that hasn't happened in a year and a half because the stupid pandemic, the rules have changed and we just can't bring anybody on set anymore. But that was one way. And I had one student specifically who, you know, they all came to set, and most students just hang out and watch. This one student, he looked over at the grip department, walked over to the gaffer and said, just as they were moving lighting gear, he just went over and said, can I help you? And the gaff's like, yeah, go ahead, grab that stuff. And he just started working. And he worked that day. And while everybody else was just hanging out watching, this guy went and started helping the lighting department. At the end of the day, I didn't even know. At the end of the day, the gaffer goes to me, yeah, what's this kid's name? And he really, he just stepped up and started working. And I'm like, oh, he's a good guy. He's like, oh yeah. And then so he's like, well, we need help next week. Can we hire him? And I'm like, sure. Not mine. You don't ask me. And just by doing that, he ended up working on a few of the shows because he showed that he was motivated to work, and he didn't know everything. What he did do was listen to instruction. And more importantly, if he didn't know something, he just asked and said, well, I don't know how to do this. Can you show me? And then did it. And so a lot of it's about self-motivation, about getting yourself out there. And, I know this all sounds like a bunch of BS and stuff, but it really is, it goes a long way to moving yourself forward. Everything that I've moved in my career has been based on giving 100%, whether I'm working for free for a friend or I'm getting paid the most money I've ever got paid for a day rate. I treat them all the same as I'm going to work 100% and show people that's what I do. And that's what people then remember down the road and how important that is. So something to think about down the road. And that could be in this job, this industry, or it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It all applies the same way. There's no escaping hard work. And if you really do have hard work and you're a good person on top of it, people see that and they acknowledge that, and you can move forward in life.
No, that's really informative. Do you mind if I share something just like really quick? I don't want to take attention away.
No, go. Absolutely.
So my home college is Pierce College, and I'm an actress, but I also write horror screenplays. Like that's my genre is horror. That's what I write. That's what I make. And it's very rare that horror people get taken seriously a lot of the time. And so we had the creator of Final Destination come to our class, and he wrote the screenplay for the first Final Destination. And I have a horror web series, and I went, no, I'm not going to mention it. I'm not going to mention it. I don't want to take attention away from him. And then I just kind of dropped it. Like I just kind of casually said, oh, I have this. And I asked a question in terms of business or production or whatever. And then after that, he contacted me and said, can I watch it? And so I barely mentioned it. And it was just I kind of slipped it in there. And then he watched it and then gave me feedback on it. And I am really bad about asking for stuff for myself. And because again, I didn't want to take attention away from what he was doing or what he was talking about. But just me mentioning it, and now I have his email address and we can, contact back and forth and whatever. Something just came up, this new horror anthology series came up, and I write short horror anthology. And I reached out to him and I was like, hey, do you have any information on how I can communicate with people that make horror anthology series? Obviously he's very busy. He takes a really long time to get back to me, but he does get back to me. And it meant a lot for me to, it's not that we're BFFs or anything, but that I have that contact was like a big deal for me. So
Yeah, and you go ahead.
No. I was just saying where you were like, oh, maybe this is all just useless and like it's about what you know. But what you're talking about is you are making those connections yourself. Like it's not this far off, oh, you have to like meet somebody at a Hollywood party or something like that. Like you can be on set and just say something. Like you can make those connections for yourself, especially in Los Angeles. Like for me, in terms of going to a university, who works at the university and who visits that university and the teachers that I've met that come out of those universities is why I picked that university. It's not the program. It's okay, who am I getting out of that school, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. So, you know, you hit on something that's important, is that you do have to kind of toot your own horn. You have to acknowledge if you do stuff, because think about it this way. If you're the greatest painter in the world, right? And you paint the most amazing paintings anybody's ever seen in their life, and they just sit in your garage, does anybody know? Is anybody ever going to know? See? So you have to let people know. And so there's a fine line. And I think way you described it, you approached it, of what you don't want to do is come on set and be like, hey, look at me, look what I do. I'm this, I'm the greatest. If you do that, you're going to turn people off. But what I will say is most professionals take interest in other people. So for example, I know that when there's new people, PAs, camera assistants, anybody, I just start asking them questions. And I'm like, hey, so like I have a set of questions I'll throw at a PA. I'm like, okay, so I'll be like, yeah, tell me about yourself. I'm like, what are your goals? What do you want to do in life? What is it that you really want to do? Because I know you're not planning on being a professional PA. And I do that because I want to know I want to know what's going on here, because and not that I'm looking to exploit someone, I'm not, but I'm looking to know if someone actually has something. If someone's like, I'm a filmmaker, I'm actually a filmmaker trying to make it in. Really? Okay, I'd love to see your work. And who knows, maybe there's a connection. That's how this whole system works. So learning the nuances of give and take are important, because again, you don't want to be overpowering people, and you don't want to be like, hey, can you look at my film? No, can you look at my film? Can you? Because then people are gonna be like, okay, this is a needy problem child here, so I don't want to be dealing with this. But in the right moments, in the right situations, like you're not like in the middle of the heat of the moment in the shoot saying, oh, let's talk about my film, or let's talk about all this stuff. You find the right down moments, the moments when everyone's got a few minutes to talk, or at the end of the day, maybe early in the morning, whatever it is, and people will learn, see you as a person. And that's what's important in this world. That's why, for me, the whole theory about, send out all the resumes and just send them and email them, it's worthless. The only time I look at a resume is after I've met the person, after I've got someone who referred me to that person, maybe. And even when I look at it, I'm like, I don't know. This doesn't say anything to me. Anybody can make a resume that looks impressive. It's really about the person and finding out, giving them that one shot. But when you get that shot, you have to balance it out. Like you're saying, got to let people know what you're about, not just about, I'm there to put my head down and work. Because if you do that, people aren't going to take notice of you. And it's all about getting noticed. So if you're like, yeah, I want to be a horror filmmaker. You know what? One of my friends is an editor, and they edit these horror movies, and they actually make a profit off of it. They make all these low budget horror movies. You should meet them and talk. And that's how this whole thing works. A lot of the jobs I've gotten to are not because of the resumes. It's because of meeting the right place at the right time, talking to someone, and either they're impressed with me or I'm impressed with them, or whatever it is that makes some connection. And that's what carries us through stuff. Producers that hire me are hiring me because of what I do, but more importantly, about who I am and the working relationship I have with those people. And that's what's super important in this industry, making those connections and then maintaining those connections. So even people that I haven't worked with in a couple of years, I still keep a little list on my computer of, okay, I got to email and touch base with these people. Even if it's not truly, completely, sincere, like, okay, well, I have some people that I just want to make sure the people that I know and I've worked with that I keep in touch with and see what's going on. And maybe that leads to work, but also let them know that I'm still a human and I'm still there, but also keeps the network going together. Because in the end, when in this industry, when you really get established, it's about the network. That's what gets you the jobs. That's how you go from one position to the next, move up the food chain. And so nobody in college told me about that. Nobody said networking. They were just like, yeah, get your degree and man, you'll go out there and you're going to make TV and movies. And that's how it is. That's it. No one said, oh, I got a network. Oh, nobody told me about my identity and creating this persona or social media or any of that stuff. And that stuff is so much a part of the process. You need the skills, you need the experience, you need the talent. But even if you have all that stuff, if you're not promoting yourself, if you're not networking yourself, then that stuff goes to waste because nobody knows. So you are totally right in starting that conversation with them, even if you felt awkward about it. And that's the hard thing, to know the balance between the two. How graphic should our resumes be? Well, I guess by that means, how much do you have in your resume? What it is you can, when you first start out, you don't have much, right? So you got to put your education in there, you got to put your skill set in there, all that kind of stuff. So you got to basically polish it up as good as it looks to get going, to get someone to at least notice that you are serious about this. So that might mean, where you went to school, what your skills are, obviously, but any projects you've done, whether it's in class, whether it's with your friends, anything you can get done that you can list in there. So what the resume ends up being is just a list of what you've done. So they actually call it more like a credit list than a resume. It's not, so in the beginning, when I first started out, my resume looked a lot different. It was more like, okay, here's where I went to school, here's the skills that I know, the equipment I know how to use, what I am capable of doing. And then there's a list of things that I've worked on, because I didn't have much there. But as you progress further and further and further, it starts shifting. So if you look, for example, here's scripted, nonfiction, and if it just keeps going and going and going and going to what you've listed, and eventually that's what it becomes. So when you don't have all this, you got to kind of work with what you have. So if you've shot 3 things or 4 things, you kind of got to put it in there to let people see what you want to know, because they want to know what you're capable of doing. But in also depending on the job. So if you're going to be a camera person, you better have some credits there to list that you've worked on some shows as a camera person. You better maybe list the cameras you've worked with, so people can go, okay, did you just work with these things, DSLRs, or did you work with cinema cameras, professional cameras? Because that's going to really show what you know. If you say I've worked with a Sony Venice camera, then okay, well, that means you've worked on some real productions, because that's who uses those cameras. If you're like, well, I've used the Canon 5D Mark IV, then okay, well, you probably, some lower level stuff is in there. So that kind of sits where you're at. But any information you can put in there, you don't need to make it super, super detailed. Just make enough that people can get an understanding of who you are and what you're capable of doing. Sometimes when you really don't have much, you might list your skills, you might list what school, you may write a short paragraph describing who you are and what your ambitions are, and not very wishy-washy, but more kind of direct, trying to make a game plan and show people that you're serious. Most people don't need something elaborate with graphics and everything. Nobody cares. They just want to see something, read it quick, and see where you've come from. So in reality, most, maybe you have a nice little letterhead on the top, something slightly graphic-y, but you don't want to have it overkill. You just, it's more about the information that's presented there than it is about the format that it's presented in. And it doesn't hurt. Like if you're saying, well, I'm really good at graphic design, and you have it formatted really nice, that might help your goal. But if you're trying to become a PA, I don't know. I haven't seen many that are super complicated. Most of them are more simple text, but I can't imagine if it's formatted nicely, it would hurt.
Yeah, there was actually a question earlier when we were talking about cameras that was left by Dominique, I don't think you ever got to it, but she said, I got a Sony A6000 a while ago. Do you think it'd work?
At
Do you think
6,000?
it'd be good? Yeah, she said A6000. I got it a while ago. Do you think it'd be good?
Yeah, I think it's at the bottom of Sony's cameras. It's like the entry level to the alpha cameras, and it may not have good. I think the problem with the 600s is that their autofocus may not be that great, and some of the codecs may not be up to speed, but it certainly will get the job done for sure. For this class, definitely, it's a good starting place. You can always, 6400s are kind of the right what most people jump into when it comes to a Sony camera right now is the entry level camera, because they're fairly affordable. I mean, we're still looking at like $600-700, maybe $800 with a lens, but again, that's a lot cheaper than $4,000. Not as cheap as this. You can get one of these for probably like $500-600 with a lens, but now we're looking at a couple $100 difference to get a better camera. So even if you get a 6,000, I think it's okay, at least to get going.
I have a question, and it might be a weird question, but I know generally to be a PA, you need to have a car. So if you just want to help out on a project, but you do not have a car, is there anything that, production needs, like, I don't know, somebody who is kind of a secretary for them, like sends emails or makes sure contacts are lines up or anything like that? Like, is there another position that's similar to a PA that's like a helper?
Well, there's basically two types of PAs. There's production PAs, and then there's what I call set PAs. So production PAs basically work in the office.
Oh, okay.
So they're part of the day-to-day. And a lot of people who want to become producers, or maybe they're more about writing and being creative, won't get a set PA job. They'll get a production job where they're in the production offices where that stuff's happening. And so those PAs may not necessarily need a car, but I will tell you right now that that's a big deal. That's an important thing to have. If you don't have a car, a lot of people will look at you going, I'm not sure I can hire this person, because not that it deems you as unreliable, but what it means is that you're at the mercy of another system. So for example, if you don't own a car and you're like, well, it's okay, but I just Uber to work every day. Well, what if something happened with the Uber and you're late? Or I take public transportation. What if something wrong with public gets delayed? That's how they look at it. So I'd say to work in the PA world, even in the office, having a car, even if it's a meter car, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's a car, is kind of important, because they may ask you to do runs on your own vehicle. A lot of times they'll have you take the company vehicle, like they'll rent vans, and then you have to drive that. So probably a license is the most important thing. If you don't have a license, that's probably one thing that could be problematic, is being a PA. Because a lot of times even the office PAs will end up working on set, because a lot of times people want to go, like you're in the office, you're doing all the busy work, the grunt work to get the production going, and then once they're all on set, a lot of times you're like, yeah, I want to be on set, because that's the fun place, right? That's where all the excitement, where the magic happens. So everybody wants to be there. So a lot of times if you're an office PA, you may get first dibs on going onto the set over somebody else, because you're already established in there. You already worked, for 3 months in the office, and then the productions are about ready to go onto location. And they're like, well, we need a set PA. You might say, hey, can I go? I want to go. And they're going to be like, all right, yeah, as long as if it works out for the company, like you're not having any other duties in the office, they may send you there to work because they already know you. So, and you could get the office job PA and commute there with public or Uber or whatever transportation, and then make it a notion to people know, well, I'm getting my car or whatever, and then may transition you into there. So the only problem in my opinion, about the office PA position is that you're in a closed loop system, because you're working with just the producers in there. And that might not be a bad thing, specifically if you want to be a producer. And a lot of times office PAs move up to assistants in that world, and they become, you know, the assistant to a producer, an executive. And those people move up the food chain in the production world, you know, in the producer world, a lot quicker than a set PA on set. So depending on what path you want to go, if you want to be a producer, a writer, maybe that's the world to stay into. But if you are like, you know, I really want to meet crew and learn all that stuff, the office PA may not get the access to all that, because if they're not on set, most crew do not go into the office. The only people from crew that go into the office is the heads of the departments, like DPs, gaffers, sound, head of the sound department, hair, you know, wardrobe, makeup, art department. But the PAs and all them, the rest of the people that work in there don't go in the office. So you might not get exposure to those people enough that they get to know you. That kind of makes sense. All right. Well, I think I got some interesting discussion going today. So recap real quick, and we're going to wrap it up. Just remember that, you know, this assignment's just about getting cool shots, thinking about that, trying to be creative with your individual shots and not worrying too much about the sequence and creating a whole mini movie or any of that stuff. We're gonna have plenty of time to do that. So right now, focus on framing, composition, depth of field, all those cool things to make compelling images that we all can look at and go, wow, that's really cool. That's what this is about. And then wait till the next assignment where we'll get more complicated. And that'll be like, okay, sequences, we gotta think about how to do that. And I'll post the information about getting the cameras from the school in probably about an hour or two. So give me like till like later on today. I should have it online. And there you have it. So we had a half and half class today of talking about what we had to do in class, and then kind of open, kind of BSing, shall we say, right? Talking shop. So what I'd like from you guys throughout the semester is think about this. Think about, open questions and everything, because, and I keep pushing it, but I think it's important because I know that I didn't get that opportunity too much often in class to really talk besides what today's lesson is about this. Well, let's talk about stuff outside of that, what the real world's about. How do you get jobs? How does it work on set? What's the stress like? What's it like to work on a 12-hour day? How do you cram this much stuff that you got to shoot into a day that's that big? There's all these other questions, other things we can talk about that are not directly related to what's on the curriculum here that you should think about and take advantage of during this semester. You guys have a great day, and I'll see everybody on Wednesday.